The engines of the jet were already spinning. Calder Rowan stepped onto the sleek staircase with the same arrogance he'd worn his entire life. Leather briefcase in hand, cufflinks catching the floodlights, he barely flinched as the cold winds swept across the tarmac. But then the sirens cut through the night. Dozens of black vehicles surrounded the jet like hounds circling a cornered beast. Armed agents poured out, their movements swift, mechanical. Lights beamed down on Calder's face as he froze mid-step, one polished shoe hovering above the metal stair. Calder Rowan, a voice thundered through a bullhorn, stepped down immediately. "You are under investigation." For the first time in years, he hesitated. The boardroom charmer, the finance world's golden boy, the man who once believed he owned everything, companies, headlines, people. But tonight, he owned nothing, not even time. As he slowly turned to face the wall of agents, the world seemed to pause. Because this wasn't just the fall of a powerful man. It was the final move in a story that began with one quiet woman, his wife. She never yelled, never raised her voice. She wasn't the kind to make noise. But what she did, it brought a man who believed he was untouchable to his knees. And tonight, I'll tell you how she did it. Welcome, new and returning viewers, to another story from Mr. Ross' Story Trail, where real life is often more moving than fiction. This isn't just a story of betrayal and payback. It's a story of quiet strength, of dignity in the face of humiliation, and of a woman who lost everything and chose not to break, but to rise. If you believe people need to hear stories that stir emotion, show consequences, and remind us of who we truly are, please like this video, drop a comment, and subscribe. You support more than just a channel. You support truth in storytelling. Before the headlines, before the expose, before the collapse, there was a world built on status and shine, towering glass offices, private jets, gala dinners, and a man the world believed had everything under control. Calder Rowan, CEO, billionaire, a man with a mouth full of charm and a heart walled off by ambition. And her, Ilara, she wasn't loud. She didn't have to be. Because when quiet people decide they've had enough, they don't warn you, they just end it. High above the heartbeat of Chicago stood a monolith, a structure of steel and glass that caught the sun before it touched anything else. Levington Holdings. The name alone sent tremors through financial markets. It was Calder Rowan's fortress, his empire, his proof to the world that he didn't just win. He dominated. Inside, floors gleamed. Assistants moved like clockwork. Phones buzzed with billion-dollar conversations. Every executive feared disappointing him. Every competitor feared becoming his next acquisition. He was everywhere, on magazine covers, finance panels, private yachts, and press conferences. The kind of man who smiled with calculation and shook hands like he was claiming ownership. He walked like nothing could touch him. Maybe nothing could, until Ilara. She wasn't the type to fill a room, but somehow, you noticed when she left it. Ilara was grace without performance, the kind of beauty that didn't ask to be seen. Her presence lingered like the scent of lilacs, familiar, soothing, and quietly unforgettable. They met at a university lecture. Calder was a guest speaker, pacing in front of future business leaders like a wolf among lambs. The room was filled with students clinging to every word he said, eager to impress. Except for her. She didn't clap. She didn't nod. She waited. Then she asked the question that silenced everyone. If you lost everything tomorrow, would you still know who you are? The entire auditorium blinked. Even Calder paused. He should have laughed it off. But instead, he looked at her, really looked, and saw something no balance sheet could quantify. A challenge, a mirror, a mystery. They married less than a year later. The media adored them. The cold-blooded tycoon and the woman no one could quite figure out. To the outside world, they were flawless. To each other, for a time, they were real. He flew her to Santorini just to see her smile. She filled their home with warmth money couldn't fake. He called her his grounding force. She believed he meant it. Together, they had a daughter, Celine, with her mother's eyes and her father's will. But the world Calder built wasn't meant to nurture. It was meant to consume. And slowly, without either of them noticing at first, love became something that had to fight for air. The lights from the city blinked through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Inside, silence. Ilara sat alone on the corner of their oversized velvet couch, a book open on her lap, unread for hours. One slipper dangled from her foot. The clock ticked past midnight. Again. She didn't check her phone. She didn't need to. She already knew he wasn't coming home. Across the room, framed photos tried to lie for them. Perfect smiles on yachts, champagne, toasts in Monaco, staged laughter beside other couples who didn't last either. But the room told the truth. So did her reflection. Her dress from dinner still clung to her like a question left unanswered. It started with absence, longer work trips, last-minute meetings, events she was suddenly too busy to attend with him. Next came the whispers, soft, careful words from people who almost didn't tell her. He was seen at the Westline Hotel last Thursday, but the conference ended Wednesday. I didn't want to say anything. But she was wearing your perfume. And then there were the lipsticks, one shade too red to be hers. The scent of unfamiliar skin on his suit. She didn't confront him in rage. That wasn't her way. Instead, she waited until the right moment. A quiet evening, just the two of them. Their daughter asleep. The world outside pretending everything was fine. Her voice was steady. "Is there someone else?" He looked up from his drink and laughed. Not the kind of laugh that tries to deny. The kind that tells you you were never meant to ask. "Sweetheart," he said, with a smirk that could bruise. "I built this life. I have appetites you wouldn't understand. You're just comfortable." There it was. Not a confession. A dismissal. And right there, in the stillness of their designer living room, something inside her didn't break. It changed. She blinked once. Just once. Then she nodded, rose from the table, and kissed her daughter goodnight. That night, Calder went to sleep thinking he'd won. He had no idea Lara had just begun counting. It was one of those evenings designed to impress, strings of golden lights, a string quartet, echoing across a rooftop garden, glasses filled with laughter that tasted like money. Alara stood beside Calder, dressed in deep emerald. Always elegant, always silent. She smiled at the camera. She thanked donors. She shook hands with people who only saw her as an accessory to power. Across the room, Callista Vane twirled a champagne flute and wrapped herself around Calder's arm like she belonged there. She didn't look away when she met Alara's eyes. She smirked. Callista was the kind of woman tabloids loved, headline beauty with sharpness behind her charm, raised on status, trained in image. Scandal looked good on her. And Calder? He didn't hide it anymore. He let the whispers bloom. He wanted Alara to see. For the public, Alara was the wife who refused to leave. They called her graceful. They called her foolish. Some pitied her. Others mocked her. She let them talk. Because while they gossiped about her silence, she was listening. While they tracked Callista's wardrobe, she was tracking offshore accounts. While Calder flaunted his power, Alara started preparing hers. No threats, no shouting, no rage, only patience, only precision. She studied. She called in debts no one remembered she was owed. She reconnected with names Calder had long forgotten, names he had burned on his way up. And slowly, the version of Alara he thought was comfortable was disappearing. Her daughter sleeping down the hall. Alara at her desk, eyes sharp, the glow of her screen lighting a page filled with numbers, names, links. On the table beside her sat an old photo of her parents in front of their flower shop. Next to it, an unopened bottle of vintage wine Calder once bought to celebrate a deal. She didn't drink it. She was saving it for a different kind of celebration, one no one would see coming. Calder Rowan once said that power belonged to those bold enough to take it. He forgot that some women don't take power by force. They take it back. Quietly. There was nothing grand about the place Alara grew up. No skylines. No gold-plated elevators. Just a small strip of stores tucked between winding roads and whispering pines. In the corner of that quiet town sat a little flower shop, the kind with handwritten signs, wooden counters, worn soft by decades of touch and windows that fogged up every time the kettle boiled behind the register. Her parents ran it together. Her mother, always humming as she wrapped stems in brown paper. Her father, cracking gentle jokes as he swept petals from the floor. There was no wealth, but there was peace. There was laughter. There was love. From her earliest years, Alara understood the language of blooms, peonies for healing, lilacs for first loves, daisies for new beginnings. Most children played with dolls. She arranged stems into stories. And maybe that's what made her different. While other girls dreamed of ballrooms and tiaras, Ilara dreamed of hands that built things, roots that held, hearts that didn't run when seasons changed. She never needed to be the loudest. She watched. She listened. People often mistook her quiet nature for passivity, but her silence was never empty. It was watchful, intentional. She remembered the names of every regular customer and the kind of flowers they bought for each mood. She remembered when Mr. Harlan came in on Tuesdays and left with yellow roses for a wife no longer alive, and how no one else noticed when he stopped showing up. She remembered which blossoms held longer in heat, which faded quickly in cold, and how sometimes people came in not for flowers, but just to be seen. Ilara learned that beauty wasn't about being noticed. It was about meaning something to the people who took the time to look closer. Ilara earned her place at university the hard way, full scholarship early, mornings, late nights, borrowed textbooks, and never missing a lecture. She didn't have polished heels or designer bags. She had determination. She had clarity. She took classes in behavioral psychology, ethics, and organizational systems. Not because she wanted to be rich, but because she was fascinated by people. How they change, how they bend, how they break. She was still working part-time at a florist's stand just outside campus the day she saw his name on the event poster. Guest lecture, Calder Rowan, CEO of Levington Holdings. Her friends buzzed with excitement. They wore fresh lip gloss. One even skipped a class to change outfits. Ilara showed up 10 minutes early with her notes, her questions, and no illusions. He entered the room like he already owned it. Tailored suit, monogrammed cuff, the sharp scent of wealth that turned heads without permission. Students adjusted their postures, glanced at each other, scribbled his name across fresh notebook pages. Calder Rowan. He didn't need to be introduced. The campus had been buzzing for days. Articles, interviews, speculation. He walked with a confidence that had been earned through conquest, not charm, though he had plenty of both. His voice, when he spoke, was crisp and measured. He talked about success, about control, about strategy, about how business wasn't about heart, it was about leverage. The room was hooked. No one blinked. Except one. Ilara had sat in the second row, not to be seen, but to see clearly. She watched the reactions around her. Wide eyes, polite nods, sycophantic smiles. She waited until the Q&A. No one raised their hand at first. They were too in awe. She did. He noticed. Her question was quiet but firm. If you lost everything tomorrow, your company, your name, your money, would you still know who you are? The air seemed to shift. A few students shifted uncomfortably. One chuckled. But Calder? He stared at her. Just for a moment. His mouth opened, then closed. A flash of something unreadable passed over his face. Interest, confusion, maybe even discomfort. Then he smiled. A real one. I like difficult questions, he said. They keep the right people up at night. He approached her after the session. Most students had gathered around, looking for selfies, internships, attention. He bypassed them. What's your name? He asked. Ilara. Ilara, what? Just Ilara. It wasn't flirtation, not yet. It was recognition, that strange pull when someone reminds you of something you didn't know you were missing. She didn't try to impress him. She didn't laugh at the wrong moments or force interest in subjects she didn't care about. She asked questions that made him think. She paused before answering. She disagreed with him, respectfully, thoughtfully. And for a man who lived in a world where everyone agreed, that was rare. Their first date wasn't planned. It happened the following week, after he coincidentally showed up at the flower stand where she worked. She saw through it immediately. Still, she offered him one stem, a soft pink peony. For healing, she said. I'm not broken. Everyone is. That's how the light gets in. He looked at her for a long time that day. They were married within the year. The beginning was real. He flew her to Paris for a single dinner. She brought him books he'd never heard of. He watched her sleep, like he was afraid she'd disappear. She memorized the way he held his breath before speaking. They laughed. They made plans. They even planted a small garden on the balcony of their first penthouse, something she insisted on. She grounds me, he said once to a journalist. At the time, he meant it. When Selena was born, Calder cried for the first time in years. He held her with unsteady hands, his expression pulled tight between awe and fear, as if he couldn't believe something so small had the power to rearrange his world. She had, Ilara's eyes. Big, observant, quiet, like she already knew something the rest of them hadn't figured out yet. He whispered her name over and over like a prayer. Solène. Solène. For a while, everything softened. He worked from home more often. He left his phone face down on the table. He carried Solène through the halls of their penthouse wrapped in his cashmere suit jacket, humming songs he'd never admit to knowing. He even watered the garden once, the same peonies Ilara had planted on their balcony. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. And real was enough. But then came the merger. Then the acquisition. Then the cover story on the finance magazine. Then another. With every new deal, Calder became larger than life and less human. Their calendar filled with events, interviews, charity appearances. Their names became brand assets. Their smiles, headlines. And slowly, he started to vanish. Not all at once. Not in a way that left bruises. But in ways Ilara couldn't explain. She'd wake to cold sheets beside her. She'd hear him laughing on the phone with people she'd never met. He'd leave for 2-day meetings and come back with no stories to tell. At first, they spoke in full sentences, then in phrases, then in reminders. Your mother's birthday dinner is Thursday. Solène's recital is at 4. Your dry cleaning's ready. And then the quiet started to stretch. Not angry, not bitter, just hollow. One night, Ilara watched him sleep. Not out of affection, but curiosity. He didn't look peaceful. He looked burdened. She tried to remember the last time they'd laughed together. She couldn't. She tried to remember the last time he looked at her like he used to. Not through her. At her. Still, she said nothing. Because love, when it fades, doesn't announce itself. It just stops returning calls. Months later, during a press shoot in their home, a reporter asked Calder what grounded him. He smiled that public smile, charming, contained. My daughter, he said. Ilara was standing 6 feet away. He didn't glance at her once. It was supposed to be a quiet evening. Solène was at a sleepover. The apartment was still. Ilara had planned to soak in the tub, maybe red, something light, something that would pull her away from the ache of distance. But as she picked up Calder's blazer from the floor, something small slipped from the inside pocket. A receipt. Not just any receipt, a handwritten one from a hotel lounge she hadn't visited, dated 3 days ago. 2 glasses of vintage champagne, 1 dessert, a name signed at the bottom in looping cursive. Not his, not hers. And next to it, a red lipstick, rolled closed, unfamiliar in color, bold and sharp as a wound. She stood there for a long time. The room didn't spin. Her hands didn't tremble. Her voice didn't rise. She simply understood. This wasn't a suspicion. This was confirmation. He came home late, smelling like cologne that didn't belong to him. His tie undone, eyes tired but unapologetic. Ilara was waiting, calm, seated, legs crossed, the receipt in her hand, placed neatly on the glass table in front of her. Are you going to lie first or laugh first? Calder raised an eyebrow. Excuse me? The lipstick, the hotel, the signature. Do I need to spell it out, or would you prefer to insult my intelligence instead? He exhaled. Not shocked, not remorseful, just annoyed. Ilara, don't start this. Start what? He walked to the bar, poured himself a drink without asking if she wanted one. He didn't even look at her. You don't understand the world I live in. No, she said. I understand it perfectly. You just stopped pretending I was part of it. That got his attention. He turned then, slowly, glass in hand. Sweetheart, I built this empire, every inch of it. I didn't marry you to compete with you. I married you because you were stable, calm, familiar, comfortable, she whispered, like the word had just shown itself. Exactly, he said, smiling faintly. You're not the type who makes messes. You're the one who holds things together. She stared at him. A long, silent stare. He finished his drink and walked past her. No apology, no hesitation. That night, after the lights were off and the city hummed outside their window, Ilara sat beside her daughter's empty bed. She looked at the toys scattered across the floor, the little ballet slippers resting against the dresser, the family photo tucked into the corner of the mirror, Celine's arms wrapped around both parents. A family. She stared at her own face in the photo. The smile, the posture, The carefully chosen dress. None of it looked real anymore. He had called her comfortable. Like a couch, like a habit, like something you fall into when you're too lazy to reach for more. But comfort wasn't weakness. Comfort was what gave their daughter a sense of safety. It was what held their home steady when he flew off chasing power. He didn't see it. But she did. And she knew what he had just given her. Not an insult. Permission. Some people show you exactly who they are when they think you'll never leave. Have you ever seen someone change after success? Not just grow, but shift into something cold? Tell me in the comments. I want to know your story. And if Alara's quiet strength already speaks to something you've felt, tap that like button, share this with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more. You're not alone. It began with a photograph. A tabloid caught it first, called her Rowan, stepping out of a black car in front of the Lyran Art Museum, his arm casually resting on the waist of a woman who wasn't Alara. She wore a silk gown that clung like intention, lips painted to provoke, eyes sharp with someone who knew she was being watched. The headline didn't mention Alara. It didn't need to. Callista Vane, daughter of an aging oil magnate, heiress to a family tree riddled with whispers and wealth, known in certain circles for her love of lavish escapes, sharp sarcasm, and a track record of leaving men emptier than they arrived. She had never been subtle, and Calder adored that about her. To him, she was chaos wrapped in lace. To the public, she was a new fascination. To Alara, she was a message. Alara noticed how Calder stopped offering explanations. He no longer called when he missed dinner. He stopped inviting her to the events until the press noticed, and he insisted she attend with him. Just to stand beside Callista like some twisted equation he hoped the cameras couldn't solve. He would arrive with Callista on one arm and Alara trailing behind. The smile on his face said, untouchable. The look in his eyes said, daring. People whispered, of course. They always do. Some glanced at Alara with sympathy, others with that cruel curiosity reserved for those who stay when they shouldn't have to. But she didn't blink. She didn't cry in public. She didn't give them the satisfaction. Callista never apologized. Not once. She greeted Alara like an acquaintance at brunch, polite, poised, empty of sincerity. I adore your dress. Timeless is so underrated these days. Alara smiled gently, tilting her head just enough to meet Callista's gaze. And fleeting is so often confused with extraordinary. It landed. Callista's smirk flickered. Just once. At a fundraiser hosted in Calder's name, Callista took center stage, toasting. The crowd, laughing too loudly, draping herself in praise like it was jewelry. Alara stood near the balcony, silent as always. That night, Calder leaned into Callista, kissed her cheek in full view of photographers, and didn't look back at Alara once. The next morning, 3 media outlets referred to Callista as the woman beside Calder Rowan. Alara's name didn't appear in the coverage at all. At home, she walked past him without a word. He didn't notice. In her silence, she was taking notes, not of what was happening, but of who he had become. Because sometimes, the person who betrays you isn't new. They've just taken off the mask they wore for as long as you loved them. And once you see them clearly, there's no going back. Alara didn't scream. She didn't shatter glasses. She didn't storm into rooms demanding explanations. She knew Calder wouldn't understand the language of pain unless it came in the form of numbers or reputation. So she chose a different response. She went quiet, not defeated, not passive. Still, a stillness that allowed her to see everything. Every change in his schedule, every new contact in his call log, every deviation in his expense reports. Every time he left the room smiling and came back forgetting she was in it. He believed she'd faded, that she was disappearing like steam on glass, warm at first, then gone. But that was his mistake. The woman he married hadn't vanished. She had just learned to step out of the light, long enough to let his shadow reveal itself. She stopped attending to his tone and focused on his habits. He changed passwords more often. He flew on jets without flight records. He took calls in rooms without windows. He left behind traces, not enough to raise alarms, but just enough for someone who knew him intimately to recognize the shift. Alara didn't need full access. She only needed patterns. And Calder had always been a man of patterns. She began making calls, nothing obvious, no long conversations. A message here, a lunch there, an invitation accepted, with no please reply. People who owed her kindness. People who had once respected her before she became the wife. A former professor in corporate ethics. An old friend who worked in venture capital. A woman she once helped fundraise for a startup, who was now worth more than Calder ever knew. She never used his name when she reached out. She used hers, her maiden name, and they remembered. At night, while Calder toasted champagne with Callista on yachts in Santorini, Alara sat at her desk with a cup of tea and a screen full of articles on corporate law. She downloaded market forecasts, regulatory archives, and legal summaries. She studied. She highlighted. She built folders, not because she needed to know everything, but because when the moment came, she would be ready. One afternoon, at a museum event, she bumped into an older man she hadn't seen in years. His name was Bennett Hale, once a senior executive at Levington Holdings. Until Calder forced him out during a hostile restructuring, he looked at her with surprise, then with caution. "Still standing?" he asked. "I never sat down," she replied, without smiling. That night, he sent her an encrypted message. Just 2 words. "Call me." Through it all, Alara shielded her daughter. She braided her hair in the mornings, packed her lunch herself, even when the chef offered, tucked her in every night with a story, always stories about strong women, who didn't raise their voice to be heard, but still changed the world. One evening, Solène asked, "Why do some people lie when they say they love you?" Alara paused, then leaned in, brushing a curl behind her daughter's ear. "Because they think love is something you say, but real love is something you do, every day, no matter who's watching." To Calder, Alara looked the same. Still graceful, still calm, still there. He didn't notice how often she was reading. He didn't notice the names in her phone. He didn't ask why she had started taking meetings of her own. He was too busy showing off a woman who looked better on magazine covers to realize he was handing his power to a woman who never asked to borrow it. Alara was no longer watching Calder. She was watching his empire. In the beginning, it was curiosity, small inconsistencies in the financial statements she still had access to through her legal designation, documents he assumed she never bothered to check. But Alara believed in detail, and the details didn't match, dates that didn't align, transactions routed through holding companies she didn't recognize, funds disappearing into unnamed accounts, assets declared twice in different currencies, not enough to make noise, just enough to raise a question. And Alara? She had built her entire life on asking the right questions. She began meeting Bennett once a week, quietly. An art gallery, a closed bookstore, a private lounge tucked behind a wine cellar no one bothered to check. He brought documents, she brought notes. At first he was cautious, unsure of how far she was willing to go. But she didn't flinch. Not when he described the shell companies Calder used to inflate valuations. Not when he showed her how projected assets were being counted as liquid. "He's built a glass tower on borrowed air," Bennett said. "It's not illegal, yet. But it's reckless, and it's fragile." Alara listened, eyes steady. "I don't want to destroy him," she said. "I want the truth, and I want it to speak for itself." She reached out to a contact from her university days, a woman who had become a quiet but influential investigative journalist. Not the kind who wrote headlines, the kind who exposed foundations. Alara didn't offer the full story. Not yet. She simply asked, "If someone handed you the blueprint of a lie, would you know what to do with it?" The reply came in 2 words. "Try me." At home, Calder laughed louder than ever. He returned from trips with gifts he never wrapped. He kissed Solène's forehead like a habit. He kissed Alara's cheek like an afterthought. He had no idea the walls were closing in, because Alara didn't change her routine. She still laid out his preferred tie on Mondays. She still answered emails on his behalf. She still showed up beside him when the press demanded a family presence. But she was documenting everything, not because she wanted revenge, but because she needed evidence, proof, not just for courts or articles, for herself. Because women who are dismissed as comfortable aren't trying to get even. They're building something you'll never see, until you trip over it. One evening, Calder came home earlier than usual. Alara had her laptop open, spreadsheet pulled halfway up the screen, financial logins still active. He glanced at her but didn't stop walking. "Still planning birthday parties and grocery lists?" "Something like that," she said, smiling. He kissed her on the forehead, patronizing, distant, and left the room. That moment sealed it. He didn't see her, not who she was, not who she was becoming. He had convinced himself she wouldn't move without his permission. 2 weeks later, Ilara's account, under her maiden name, was officially listed as a private investor in a growing tech firm backed by a venture group in Boston. The move was quiet, unannounced, untraceable to him. It wasn't her first. It wouldn't be her last. Every decision was one stitch in a net she was quietly casting. But what Calder didn't know was that Ilara was already 3 steps ahead. Ilara had always made herself small enough to fit inside Calder's world. Now, she was reclaiming the space he never thought she needed. She started where most powerful moves begin, quietly, with a single message. Her first text was to a woman named Davina Ward, a senior partner at a venture firm who had once been her roommate in university housing. Not reaching out as his wife, just as myself. Would love to talk, if there's space for real conversation. Davina responded within the hour. By the end of the week, Ilara had 5 meetings lined up, all under her maiden name. No press, no introductions, just private rooms and thoughtful questions. Some of the people she contacted remembered her immediately. Others paused when she introduced herself, blinking in surprise. "I thought you disappeared after you married him." "No," she replied. "I was watching," and for the first time in years, people didn't speak to her like she was a name beside someone else's title. They listened, because Ilara didn't posture. She didn't ask for favors. She came with strategy, with notes, with questions that revealed she wasn't new to this, just quiet about it. And in the world of business, where noise was often mistaken for intelligence, she disarmed them with substance. At night, after Celine was asleep, Ilara turned on her laptop and opened a dozen tabs. She enrolled in online programs, corporate law, market analysis, tax structures, ethics, in private equity. Each one became a stepping stone. The material wasn't easy, but neither was raising a child in a house built on neglect. She studied at the same desk where she once planned birthday parties. Now, she was building models for financial accountability, reading through case law before sunrise, highlighting terms Calder's lawyers never bothered to explain to her. Knowledge wasn't just power. It was insulation. It was protection. It was preparation. In the daylight, Ilara remained the mother Calder assumed was content with appearances. She braided Celine's hair, packed her art supplies for school, left notes in her lunchbox that read, "Kindness is the highest form of strength. Ask the question no one else is asking. You are never too small to do something important." They sat by the windowsill on rainy mornings playing word games and talking about choices. What makes someone brave? Celine asked one afternoon. "It's not loud," Ilara replied. "Bravery is the choice you make when no one is watching." Bennett Hale met her weekly now. He no longer saw the reserved woman married to his former employer. He saw a strategist, sharp, thoughtful, careful with language, ruthless with logic. He brought her articles, court rulings, leaked memos. She brought him breakdowns of Calder's new board appointments and cross-checked them with public filings. They spoke less about revenge and more about timing, exposure, consequence. "You're not trying to hurt him," Bennett said one night, studying her. "You're trying to show the world what he really is." "No," Ilara replied. "I'm just removing the shield he hid behind. The truth will do the rest." People often confused Ilara's quiet for submission, but there's a kind of strength that doesn't roar. It watches, it measures, it decides, and when it moves, it doesn't miss. As Calder expanded his empire publicly, Ilara expanded hers privately. He bought companies for sport. She studied the language of contracts. He hosted cocktail parties full of false praise. She attended roundtable discussions under a different name, learning how founders thought, how venture partners negotiated, how real decisions were made. To the outside world, Calder looked untouchable. But influence is rarely loud, and while he chased visibility, Ilara built value, the kind that wasn't inflated or borrowed. Her network grew, one call at a time. A lawyer in Boston who specialized in whistleblower protection, a compliance officer she once helped during a difficult pregnancy, a quietly brilliant coder from a tech startup she'd invested in months earlier, someone who knew how to trace financial fingerprints across multiple entities without setting off alarms. Each person brought a piece of a much larger puzzle. Each one owed her nothing, and yet they showed up, not for revenge, for respect, Because Alara never asked for help like a victim. She asked like someone with purpose. "Your husband is reckless," one of her contacts said, sliding over a folder. "But it's not just arrogance, it's carelessness. He thinks he's insulated. Because he assumes I'm irrelevant," Alara replied, flipping through the pages. "That's his second mistake. And the first? Thinking I didn't notice. At home, things looked unchanged. Calder still breezed in with the scent of foreign cities on his coat. He still updated her on boardroom wins as though she were reading a children's book, slow, oversimplified, assuming she'd be impressed. Alara smiled when expected, nodded when required. But every time he left the room, she made another note, logged another inconsistency, forwarded another document to her encrypted account. She didn't need confrontation, she needed time. And Calder, in his endless ego, gave her exactly that. One evening, while Alara was tucking Solène into bed, the little girl asked a question that stopped her cold. "Mommy, why don't you ever get angry?" Alara paused. "What makes you think I don't?" "Because you're always calm, even when things feel bad." Alara ran her fingers through Solène's hair, then whispered, "Anger is a spark, but calm is the fire that keeps burning long enough to change something." Solène didn't fully understand, but she would, one day. Some people choose to fight with volume, but others, they fight with vision, with discipline, and with silence so sharp it cuts deeper than shouting ever could. If you believe that true strength doesn't always look like noise, and that calm people shouldn't be underestimated, leave a comment below. Tap that like button. Subscribe. There are so many Alaras in the world. Some of them just need to know they're not alone. By this point, Alara wasn't seeking permission. She was collecting proof. Proof of fraud. Proof of manipulation. Proof that Calder's empire was not built on brilliance, but on bluff. Every click, every signature, every offhand comment he made at dinner. She stored it all. Not for revenge, for precision. Because when she moved, it wouldn't be messy. It would be final. Alara didn't just want evidence. She wanted a map. One that would lead from exposure to justice with no detours, no guesswork, no open doors for Calder to spin the narrative in his favor. With Bennett, she began developing exactly that. Every financial document was double verified. Every legal step was outlined. Every press contact vetted for integrity, not reach. They created a digital archive with 2 offline backups, a secure trail that could be handed over at the right moment, and would tell the story without Alara ever needing to speak a word on camera. There were people who would say she should have left quietly. Take the money. Start over. Forget. But Alara knew that silence after betrayal only helped the betrayer. And Calder? He had used her dignity as a shield for far too long. She had shown up beside him, smiled on cue, worn grace-like armor. No more. This wasn't about revenge. This was about corrections. Because when men like Calder are never held accountable, they don't just repeat the cycle. They expand it. There was one thread she hadn't been able to pull, a fund hidden in a trust beneath layers of ownership. Bennett had hit a wall. That's when Alara remembered Matthias Geller, a Swiss-born compliance officer, who once flirted with Calder's firm, then vanished from the picture. She'd met him once at a benefit. He'd complimented her mind, not her dress. She messaged him through an encrypted line. "I believe we may be looking at the same set of numbers, from different angles." He responded the same night. "Let's make them align." One evening, Alara sat with Solène as she colored in her sketchbook. She flipped to a page that showed 3 figures, a woman holding a flower, a little girl, and a man with his back turned, walking away. "Who are they?" Alara asked softly. Solène shrugged. "Just people. But the flower means the girl is safe, because the flower was a promise." Ilara's throat tightened. Her daughter didn't know the full story, but she knew enough. And that was the moment Alara realized. This wasn't just about ending Calder's deception. It was about preserving the truth her daughter was being raised around. The last few weeks of preparation were not dramatic. They were measured. Bennett handled the documentation flow. Matthias traced the offshore trail. The journalist Alara had once mentored built a framework to publish the story when the time was right, tied to a verified dossier, irrefutable and legally reviewed. Everything was backed up. Every contact had instructions in case Alara went silent. No leaks, No ego, just structure. One night, after sending the final files to her journalist contact, Elara stood in front of the long mirror in her bedroom. She looked at the woman staring back. Not broken, not forgotten, not comfortable, capable, certain, clear. She whispered aloud, not to anyone in the room, but to herself. You didn't just survive this, you redefined it. Elara never broke in. She didn't need to. Calder's confidence had always been his shield, but it also made him careless. He used the same naming structure for most of his cloud folders. He recycled passwords more often than he recycled board members. And while his empire sprawled across multiple countries and sectors, much of it still funneled through digital tools she had quietly helped set up when they first married. She began by opening a shared folder titled simply, Fourth Quarter Consolidation. Inside were files she wasn't supposed to see. And once she stepped through that door, she didn't look back. It was small. A valuation report dated 3 months prior that listed asset totals higher than what had been reported to the SEC. She ran the same report through a public database. The numbers didn't match. At first, she assumed it was a draft. Then she found a second copy, identical formatting, different values. Then a third, sanitized for board review. 3 versions of the same truth, each one tailored for a different set of eyes. With help from Matthias and Bennett, she began tracing entities Calder had quietly stacked beneath Levington Holdings, companies that existed only on paper, used to inflate acquisition values, manipulate stock movement, and protect taxable income under shell agreements. She found routing accounts buried under abbreviated labels, tax shelters mislabeled as charitable extensions, payments sent to advisory boards that didn't exist. This wasn't business strategy. This was manipulation so refined it passed as brilliance. But brilliance, once exposed, loses all its shine. Most nights, Calder returned from meetings too exhausted to notice anything unusual. He poured himself a drink. He scrolled through emails. He said goodnight without looking up. Elara waited for his breathing to settle, then slipped from the bed like a shadow, moved to her desk, and opened her encrypted drive. Each file she collected told a fuller story. Every detail, no matter how small, was documented, labeled, time-stamped. She didn't need to rush. She needed to be right. Within weeks, she had built what she and Bennett began calling the Wall, a master document with references to falsified quarterly statements, illicit fund transfers, asset inflation techniques, fabricated subsidiary reports, personal gain tied directly to company losses, each page linked to supporting documentation, screenshots, audit trails, email threads, a web of misconduct, too vast to ignore, too well organized to deny. It wasn't just damaging, it was damning. One night, as Elara worked in her office with her headphones on, she didn't hear Calder's footsteps until it was almost too late. She quickly minimized the open files, flicked over to a news article, and kept her hands still. He stood in the doorway, phone pressed to his ear, whispering, "No, she's asleep. I just checked. We'll do Singapore next, then Dubai. Yeah, I've got the papers locked. It's clean." Pause. She doesn't ask questions. She never has. He turned and walked away. Elara didn't move for a full minute. Then she exhaled. Not in fear, but in confirmation. Elara didn't send everything at once. She chose 5 documents. Just enough to signal credibility. Just enough to provoke interest without overwhelming. Attached to them was a simple note. This isn't fiction. This is a man who built his fortune on deception. I'll give you the rest if you're prepared to handle it like truth deserves to be handled. The reply came 6 hours later. I'm listening. Who else is? She forwarded it to Bennett. His answer was short. Just us. For now. Every file that Elara handed over to the journalist was accompanied by a written explanation. She didn't just present data. She translated it. Line 42 cross-references a payment that doesn't show up in first quarter because it was disguised as a consulting fee. The same account receives multiple deposits from different shell companies, all linked back to one holding group under Calder's control. She knew how lawyers dismissed women who had a feeling, so she gave them facts, timelines, receipts. She wasn't offering a narrative. She was offering a verdict. Calder's schedule became more unpredictable. Last-minute trips, new advisors, late-night calls in the study with the door locked. He stopped asking Elara to attend public events. Stopped explaining why. He was growing suspicious, but not of the truth. just of things slipping from his grip. He didn't know what was shifting. He just felt it. Meanwhile, Ilara met with the journalist in person, once, in a quiet corner of a library 2 cities away. She wore a plain blouse, no makeup, no jewelry. There was nothing about her that hinted at scandal. "This is more than a scoop," the journalist said. "This is a collapse." "It's not about collapse," Ilara replied. "It's about closure." After the meeting, she returned home to find Solène sitting on the kitchen floor, building something out of blocks. "What are you making?" Ilara asked. "A wall," Solène said, "to keep the mean things out." Ilara knelt beside her, picking up a small blue piece. "Do you think a wall is enough?" Solène looked up. "Not just the wall. You have to stand in front of it, too." That night, Ilara couldn't sleep. She lay awake, watching the ceiling, replaying every risk she had taken. She wasn't afraid for herself. She was protecting what mattered. Bennett sent over 2 final documents, both connected to Calder's international financial movement strategies. The journalist confirmed a legal team was now reviewing the materials. 3 independent sources had verified the shell companies. 2 whistleblower laws would apply. 1 publication date was being prepared, in silence. The headline wasn't sensational. It was surgical. A pattern of deception inside the empire of Calder-Rowan. The last document came from an anonymous source, a transaction trail tucked deep inside an international investment vehicle, one that had never appeared on Levington's books. It linked directly to a foundation Calder had publicly donated to, but privately drained. It was personal. He hadn't just moved money. He'd done it in the name of charity. He'd signed the paperwork himself. Ilara stared at the document, not with anger, with clarity. This wasn't just financial misconduct. It was ethical erosion. It was deception masked as generosity. She forwarded it to the journalist with a single sentence. "This is the one that breaks him." Later that night, the apartment felt unusually quiet. Calder hadn't returned his assistant's calls. His team had started circling him like birds sensing something off, and still, he had no idea the pressure he felt wasn't from a competitor. It was coming from his own home. Ilara stood by the window, arms folded. In the glass, she saw her reflection. Years of patience, years of being overlooked, dismissed, managed. She wasn't seeking approval anymore. She had no desire for vindication. She just wanted freedom, clean and absolute. That evening, Calder returned home unexpectedly. His tie was loose, his voice hoarse. He didn't speak at first, just poured a drink, stared out the same window she had just left. "You ever wonder what people would do if they found out everything?" he asked, not looking at her. "What do you mean?" "I mean, nobody really owns anything. They just manage perception." Ilara didn't answer. She simply studied his posture, the way his shoulders hunched just slightly, the way his voice drifted mid-thought. "You look tired," she said. He finally turned toward her. "You always knew how to say the right thing." He kissed her on the cheek and walked down the hall. She stood there for a moment, rooted in place, because for all the lies Calder had told the world, that may have been the first time he ever told the truth. By the end of the week, the journalist had the full report queued and legally cleared. The source files were stored across 3 continents. The scheduled release was locked, untraceable back to Ilara. A contact in federal finance had been alerted, anonymously. There would be no warning, no press leaks, no slow trickle. Just truth, delivered clean. Ilara stood in Celine's room that night, running her fingers gently across the edge of her daughter's bookshelf. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand beside her. A message from the journalist. Scheduled for release 6:45 a.m. Eastern. Nothing can stop it now. Ilara replied with 2 words. "Understood. Thank you." She turned off the lamp. She kissed Celine's forehead. She walked to her own room in silence. And as she slipped beneath the covers beside a man who no longer knew her, she thought, "It's done. Let the world see." The ballroom at the Aurelian Grand was lit like a crown, hundreds of crystal fixtures. Draped from a ceiling so high, you could almost forget there was a world outside. Everything glowed, tables dressed in white and gold, champagne poured into towers without spilling, live strings floated above the hum of forced laughter and fabricated charm. It was Levington Holdings' signature event, a fundraiser attended by business moguls, celebrity faces, foreign dignitaries, and those who wished they were any of the above. But on this particular night, All eyes were waiting for one arrival. Alara Rowan. She didn't arrive with an entourage. No assistant. No camera crew. No husband. She stepped out of a dark sedan and into the entrance alone, wrapped in midnight blue satin, that curved and flowed like she had stepped out of another time, timeless, sharp, unshaken. The dress caught the light just enough to turn heads, but not enough to beg for attention. Her hair was pulled back, face bare but luminous. Not overdone, not underplayed, just complete. For years the world had seen her in the background. Tonight, she entered like a question with only one answer. The chatter didn't stop all at once, but it slowed. Conversations breaking mid-sentence, glances turning and staying. Some smiled with recognition, others blinked with uncertainty. A few whispered names that couldn't quite catch up to the presence standing before them. Is that? She came alone? She's not supposed to be here. Alara didn't acknowledge a single murmur. She walked through the ballroom as though gravity answered to her pace. Calder stood near the main bar, laughing too loudly at something Callista had whispered. He was in his element, tailored suit, hands in his pockets, grin carved into place. Until he saw her, and his smile didn't drop. It tightened, as if his skin had shrunk around his certainty. He handed Callista his drink without a word and moved toward Alara. "You're early," Calder said, tone low, half smile in place. "No. You're just surprised I came." He glanced around. His voice dropped further. "You don't have to prove anything. I didn't come to prove." "Then why are you here?" She looked him in the eyes. No bitterness, no sarcasm, just clarity. Because when something ends, it deserves to end with the same poise it began. He gave a hollow chuckle. "You've always been dramatic, and you've always underestimated what dignity looks like." Before he could reply, the event host stepped to the stage, tapping the mic. "Ladies and gentlemen, if you'll find your seats, we're about to begin." Alara turned and walked away. He didn't follow. It began with a single phone buzzing on a table, then another and another. Polite murmurs gave way to hushed confusion. People reached for their phones under napkins and behind wineglasses, their expressions shifting from pleasantries to unease. Brows furrowed. Conversations froze mid-laugh. Then someone gasped. Not dramatic, not staged, just real. Alara didn't need to check hers. She already knew what time it was. 6:45 a.m. Eastern, the moment truth had been released. Screens glowed under the golden lights of the ballroom. Calder Rowan, financial fraud, offshore accounts, ethics violations. Exclusive Levington Holdings under investigation for years of corruption. CEO who preached integrity now facing federal scrutiny. Within minutes, guests began quietly exiting the floor. Whispers turned to movement. Movement turned to avoidance. Eyes that once sought Calder's approval now refused to meet his. One board member stood up and left without saying a word. Another typed furiously, texting legal counsel. A donor canceled a pledge while still seated. No one looked at Calder. They looked around him, as if he were already missing. At first, Calder held his phone without unlocking it. He watched the room instead, trying to calculate the shift. But it was too quick, too widespread. The story had gone to every outlet, every social platform, syndicated, translated, clipped, shared. His kingdom wasn't bleeding. It was already gone. He turned in place, looking for someone, anyone, to tell him this wasn't real. Callista was already walking away, phone pressed to her ear. Security detail that once hovered nearby had vanished. Even the host on stage paused, awkwardly clearing his throat. The spotlight dimmed, not literally, but perceptibly. And Calder Rowan, the man who once owned the room, had become a question mark no one wanted to answer. She remained seated, still, her hands folded gently in her lap. There was no victory in her expression, no smirk, no glance around the room seeking attention. Only breath, only silence. She had no desire to humiliate him. That wasn't the point. He had done that to himself. Calder moved swiftly toward the exit, phone to his ear, voice low and sharp. "Get the car ready. Now, get to the hangar." The doors of the ballroom didn't slam behind him, but they may as well have. People began talking openly again, but not to him. The whispers were no longer speculation. They were confirmation. At a private hangar on the city's edge, Calder's jet waited with its stairs lowered and engines humming quietly. He moved fast. Blazer off. Tie gone. Phone clenched in one hand. Sweat at his brow, not from heat, but from the collapse pressing in on every side. His driver spoke, unsure. "Sir, I don't know. There's something happening at headquarters. Just keep the engine hot. I'll settle it once I'm airborne." He climbed the stairs 2 at a time. Inside, the flight attendant greeted him cautiously. He didn't respond, didn't even sit. He just turned toward the runway window, watching the horizon like it might still obey him. Outside, the roar of another engine approached, not another jet, but black SUVs. 1, 2, 3. Uniformed agents exited with purpose, their expressions unreadable. No shouting, no scrambling, just procedure. The flight crew froze. Calder saw them through the window. For a moment, he didn't move, as if still weighing whether to open the cabin door or bolt it shut. But there was no script for this. No press statement, no investor call, no donation to buy silence. Just truth and law. The door opened. An agent stepped forward. "Mr. Rowan, step out of the aircraft." Calder blinked, once slowly, as though this were someone else's story. But it wasn't. He stepped down the stairs with heavy, deliberate steps. No handcuffs yet, not until he was off the aircraft. Once on the tarmac, they read him his rights. There were no cameras, no reporters, but it wouldn't matter. By the time he was in the car, it was already headline footage. Alara didn't stay long after. Once the crowd had thinned and the host had wrapped the speech no one truly heard, she stood and made her way to the exit. She thanked the coordinator on her way out, nodded once at a board member who had previously ignored her. She walked to her car as though the night had been any other. But inside her chest, peace, not triumph, not vengeance, just stillness, like something had finally been set down after years of carrying it. If you were Alara, what would you have done? Would you have walked away quietly, or waited until truth spoke loud enough for the world to listen? Let us know in the comments, and if you believe strength doesn't need to shout, hit like, share this story, and subscribe for more life lessons told through unforgettable truths. After the arrest, the news cycle spun with urgency. Photos of Calder in handcuffs, stock analysts pointing at red graphs, former allies suddenly struck with amnesia. But Alara didn't give a statement. She didn't tweet. She didn't issue a press release. She just left, not to Europe, not to an island, but to a quiet countryside estate she had purchased under a holding company years before. It sat near a lake lined with weeping willows and weathered wooden fences, the kind of place where time slowed down just enough to hear yourself think. She brought only the essentials, her daughter, a few boxes of books, and peace she hadn't known in years. For Solène, the transition wasn't jarring. At 7, her understanding of the world was shaped not by headlines, but by the rhythm of her mother's presence. Each morning they baked bread together, kneading dough on old wooden counters. In the afternoons they walked the lake's edge, collecting smooth stones and pretending each one had a secret inside. Alara taught her how to read maps, how to grow basil in old pots, how to ask questions not for answers, but to understand. There was no television, no interviews, no visitors except the birds that nested outside Solene's window. The world beyond still moved. But here, there was room to be whole. Meanwhile, the media tried to find her. Tabloids speculated. Anchors repeated the same narrative on loop. Some hailed her as a modern heroine. Others painted her as calculated. She didn't respond to either. Even those who had once dismissed her now begged for interviews. Not for her truth, but for their numbers. She said nothing. Because not every truth belongs to the public. Some are sacred, meant only for those who lived them. Calder, from his holding cell, attempted to send her letters. One arrived every 2 weeks, written in firm strokes on ivory paper. Apologies, justifications, regrets. She never opened a single one. She placed them in a drawer, untouched. Not out of hatred, but out of clarity. He had made his choices. And now, she was making hers. At night, when Solène had drifted off to sleep, Alara sat by the fireplace with old journals and pages of her earlier plans. Pages filled with outlines for something she once thought impossible, a firm that valued integrity over influence. Back then, it had been a dream tucked behind fear. Now, it was a vision shaped by fire. She made lists, sketched ideas, outlined values, not profits, a place where women with vision could lead, where ethics wouldn't be a slogan but a foundation, where innovation met humanity. The name came to her without force. Solace and Rise. Solace for solitude. Rise for the quiet rebuild. It would not launch with a bang. It would grow the way she had, quietly, steadily, and with purpose. The world first heard of Solace and Rise through a small, clean press. Release published on a Tuesday morning. No fanfare, no ad campaign. It simply stated, an investment firm focused on innovation with integrity, women-led, purpose-driven, built for those who believe business should serve more than itself. Within hours, inboxes filled with interest. Former competitors who once underestimated her were now requesting meetings. Investors sought to align. Founders from underfunded corners of the country wrote messages that began with, "I've waited years for someone like you." She didn't gloat. She didn't rush. She selected carefully. She built the team on character first, people who had been overlooked because they weren't loud but clear. Public perception shifted like a tide, not because she chased it, but because she never did. Her silence became a language. Her choices became her speech. Profiles were written, but she turned down the photo shoots. She declined awards. She redirected praise toward the women she funded, engineers, single mothers, inventors, teachers turned entrepreneurs. The narrative shifted from scandal to substance. She was no longer Calder Rowan's wife. She was Alara, on her own terms. One evening, after dinner, Alara and Celine sat on the porch wrapped in a single soft blanket. The air smelled of wood smoke and new grass. Celine was drawing stars on a notepad when she paused and looked up. "Mama." "Yes, my love?" "Do you miss him?" Alara's hand stopped mid-stroke on her teacup. There it was, a question asked not in judgment, not in confusion, just curiosity, like only a child can offer. Alara turned toward her, brushed a curl from her daughter's forehead. "I miss the man I thought he was," she said softly, "but not the man he chose to become." Celine looked down at her notepad again, nodded, and resumed drawing. No tears, no big moment, just truth. Alara exhaled slowly, knowing Celine had understood far more than she let on. That night, as the sky stretched open in a quilt of soft blues and starlight, Alara stood at her bedroom window. She thought of the years she had survived by shrinking, by keeping peace at the expense of herself, and how now she had built something that didn't just serve her. It protected her daughter's future. That kind of power didn't come from control. It came from clarity. A letter arrived the next day from a foundation offering her a keynote spot. She tucked it under a book on the shelf. The world would keep asking her to speak, but she was still deciding when she would say yes, because not all stories end when the villain falls. Some don't even begin until after. But fate wasn't done with Alara yet. It began with a grant application. One of the many quiet causes Solace and Rise supported was an urban community garden project on the south side of Chicago. It hadn't come with glossy decks or influencer partnerships, just a handwritten letter, a list of families involved, and a simple vision. "We believe growing food can rebuild people." Alara approved the funding without hesitation. Weeks later, she decided to visit the site in person. No photographers, no assistants. That's where she met him. Nico, sun-warmed skin, sleeves rolled up, hands deep in soil. His eyes were a quiet shade of hope. He smiled like he meant it, not to charm, not to sell, just because he was glad someone had shown up. "Thanks for backing us," he said, brushing off his hands and offering her a cup of tea from a chipped mug. No titles, no small talk about net worth. He didn't even seem to know who she was, and she liked that more than she expected. Over the next few months, she visited often. At first, she stayed on the sidelines, observing, watching Nico show children how to prune basil, how to listen to the roots before they pulled. He spoke gently, and when he laughed, it was with his eyes first. Eventually, he invited her to plant one of the orchard trees beside the back fence. She said yes. Their conversations drifted from surface level to soul level without either of them pushing. He didn't ask about her past. He asked about her dreams, and she asked about his. Nico had no hunger for power. He cared about things that couldn't be leveraged: sunlight, bees, soil pH levels, the way tomatoes grew sweeter when spoken to. He lived in a modest flat above a used bookstore, rode a bicycle instead of a car, collected first edition poetry with broken spines. He noticed details, the way Alara tugged at her sleeve when nervous, the way she always watched the sky before speaking. He never pressed, never performed. And for the first time, Alara didn't feel like she was being read as a resume. She was being seen as herself. It was slow. There were no dramatic declarations, no racing hearts, just warmth, steadiness, and time. One day he brought her a small bouquet, peonies, carefully chosen. She paused when she saw them. Her mother's favorite. "How did you know?" she asked softly. "I didn't," he said. "They just felt like you." One weekend, Nico invited Alara and Celine to a harvest lunch held in the garden. It wasn't fancy. Foldable chairs, children laughing, bowls of roasted vegetables passed hand to hand. Celine sat between two little girls, giggling as they braided her hair with marigold stems. Alara watched from the shade of an olive tree, a soft smile tugging at her lips. Nico joined her with 2 glasses of cucumber water. He said nothing at first, just sat beside her in stillness. "She likes it here," he finally said, nodding toward Celine. "She says it smells like Vermont," Alara replied. He smiled at that, noticing but not prying. "I don't want to take up space in your life," he said gently, "but I wouldn't mind sharing the edges. If you ever wanted." Alara didn't speak. She reached for his hand. Not tightly, just enough. A quiet yes. As weeks turned into seasons, their bond grew not through grand acts, but through presence. He showed up. When Celine had a fever, he brought herbal tea and a dog-eared storybook. When Alara had a board meeting, he texted, "Don't forget to eat." He never crossed boundaries, never rushed her healing. There was no comparison, no shadows of Calder. Nico wasn't filling a vacancy. He was simply being with her, and that was enough. One evening, Celine handed Nico a folded note after dinner. He opened it slowly, eyebrows raising. Inside, in blocky handwriting, "You can come back tomorrow. Mom laughs more now." He looked at Alara, unsure if he should speak. She nodded, tears welling in her eyes. It was the first unspoken blessing. That night they sat on the back porch beneath a sky bruised with fading color. Nico reached out, tucked a loose strand of hair behind Alara's ear, the way someone might brush petals from a bloom. "You deserve a love that heals," he whispered, "not wounds." She froze. No one had ever said that to her. No one had ever seen the cracks without trying to fill them or exploit them. Just see them and honor them. Her breath hitched, and for the first time in years, she cried, not the quiet, hidden tears of survival, but full, unfiltered, cathartic tears. Tears that said, "I made it. I'm safe now." Healing didn't arrive with fanfare. It arrived as a man who knew plants needed time, space, and silence to bloom. It arrived in a child's approval, freely given. It arrived in Alara's willingness to be held, not as a possession, but as a person. This chapter wasn't about romance. It was about restoration. She hadn't found someone to complete her. She had found someone who respected her wholeness. The morning air was soft. A hush covered the countryside like a blanket that hadn't yet been disturbed. Alara sat on the porch of the stone cottage she now called home. A cup of herbal tea warmed her fingers. A journal sat open on her lap, though the pen had not moved in some time. Down the hill, Celine chased butterflies with bare feet and golden curls bouncing behind her. Her laughter, unburdened, full, rose like music through the orchard trees. It had been a long journey, but in that laughter, Alara knew it had been worth every step. They called her soft. They mistook silence for weakness, but Alara's strength was never in her voice. It was in her choices, steady, deliberate, unshaken by ego. Where others shouted, she studied. Where others acted in rage, she waited. She had dismantled a man who thought himself untouchable, not with chaos, but with calculation, not with noise, but with grace. Her strength had never needed to be loud to be powerful. She could have lashed out. She could have burned bridges, destroyed reputations, fed the media frenzy. But instead, Alara chose a different kind of revenge, the kind that speaks louder than scandal, thriving. She built something new, not from rubble, but from values. She turned betrayal into vision, pain into clarity. She didn't just walk away from Calder's world. She replaced it with something better. What Calder called love had been conditional, decorative, self-serving. But the love she found in Nico, It asked nothing of her, yet gave everything freely. No demands, no power games, no mask. It was the kind of love that doesn't need a spotlight. Only presence, only sincerity. In Nico's words, she had finally heard what no one else had ever offered her. You deserve a love that heals, not wounds. And for once, she had allowed herself to believe it. Calder once mocked her as comfortable, as if kindness were a flaw, as if depth had no place in a world built on showmanship. But Ilara never let that definition become her identity. She remembered her roots. She remembered the flower shop, the smell of lilacs, the lessons of hard work, and the dignity of enough. She didn't need to fight for her worth. She only needed to protect it, to reclaim it, to live by it. Ilara knew that her greatest legacy wasn't her firm or her fortune. It was the child who watched her every day, the child who saw her mother choose decency over ego. Solène had seen her mother walk through fire with her head high. She had learned that silence can be strategic, that elegance can be a weapon, that love should always be paired with respect. And now, as she twirled beneath the apple trees, humming to herself, she carried those lessons in every step. She wouldn't have to recover from what her mother had endured. She would begin where Ilara ended, with dignity already in her pocket. Solène looked up and saw her mother watching. She waved, her smile wide and free. The kind of smile only children can give, pure, open, unafraid. Ilara smiled back. She had no need for crowns or columns anymore. Her power lived in that moment. In a world obsessed with noise, she had chosen clarity. In a world obsessed with status, she had chosen substance. In a world obsessed with taking, she had chosen to teach. And that choice, that integrity, it didn't just rebuild a life. It built a legacy. If you felt something real in Ilara's journey, if you've ever had to hold your head high while the world underestimated you, if you've had to start again, in silence, in private, in pain, and if you believe that strength doesn't have to shout, that love should feel. Like peace, not performance, that character matters more than currency, then let the world know the story matters. Like, comment your thoughts below, share this with someone who needs it, and subscribe to Mr. Ross Story Trail for more powerful narratives rooted in truth, heart, and hope. The world needs more stories like Ilara's. Let's make sure they're heard.